Good morning. My name is Andy Edmonds. I'm a geographer with the North Carolina State Historic Preservation Office. Some of you in the audience may know my name, but probably others of you are familiar with a project that I've been working on for the last 8 to 10 years, which is HPO Web. HPO Web is the SHPO's web mapping application, which shows the locations of about 125,000 historic resources across the state, and it's used in a number of different ways. As a geographer, I assist the branches of the SHPO office in several different ways, both in analyzing their spatial needs and the data sets that they need in order to create the map and locations that we keep track of, historic resources, both the buildings and sites across the state. And then today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the work that I've done can help local commissions and CLGs and respond to and prepare for severe weather events. So the first website that I want to talk about today is a flood map from the state of North Carolina. Debbie referenced this earlier. You may notice that the URL is slightly different than the one that she included in her presentation earlier, but it essentially gets you to the same place. And it's a website that is quite useful, especially for finding out information about particular properties. And there's a search. When you open up the website, there's a search function right here that allows you to type in an address, which I am going to type in an address in Morehead City. Notice that like many other websites in which you include an address, you can begin typing an address and it will find a match for you, or several matches for you. 208 South 8th Street in Morehead City is the property that I'm interested in. This CLG training was originally scheduled to be in Morehead City, and we had to avoid it because of a severe weather event that happened the same day that we were scheduled to be there. And the location, 208, is a municipal building in Morehead City. And when you type in that address, it asks you to click on a single building for more details. And so I will click on this building here at the southwest corner of the property. Now you note the map shows you a number of different data layers. These include both the streets that are surrounding the area, building footprints, and then there are some colored areas that include both flooding area of the 100-year flood and the 500-year flood, as Debbie talked about earlier. And those are actually somewhat misnomers. It's not a one chance in 100, but rather, or it's not a one opportunity every 100 years, but rather a 1% chance in any given year of there being a flood stage event. And these flood maps they identify both the zone of the flood as well as the base flood elevation. And you can see there are white lines here separating what are base flood elevations for a single zone. This is all the blue parts are AE, which is the 100-year flood. But the part that is closer to the harbor is labeled elevation 8 feet. Where our building is situated is in this area called 7-foot elevation, base flood elevation, and then this is 6 back here. The yellow parts are the 500-year flood, or more accurately, it's a 0.2% chance of flood stage in any particular year. And this website provides quite a bit of information. If you scroll down a little bit, you can see a lot of this information repeated. The flood zone is AE, the elevation is 7 foot. They provide some information about a kind of insurance you might expect to pay, and based on the values of the building and the contents of the building. And these these numbers you can change yourself to see how the flood insurance rate might change based on the value of the building. And you can also see nearby stream gauges this would be especially useful if you are in the midst of an event and you would like to kind of see how the flooding is going in a very immediate vicinity to where your property is located. If you click on the View Details button, this opens up a slightly larger view of the same website with all these information buttons at the bottom. You can click on any one of these icons in the corner of each section to pull up slightly more data about the property. So here we see it's a 7-foot base flood elevation. It's located in the town of Morehead City. Here's your zone. And all of this information is coming from what FEMA uses their flood insurance rate map. There's a panel number for that flood map. And the blue and the yellow on the web map is it's a kind of a digital representation of their legal document, which is the flood map itself. You can access that flood map by clicking on this icon of the PDF. And here you see the flood insurance rate map for most of Morehead City with those same blue and yellow zones colored on the map. There is more information at the bottom about when this map was designed, if it's been revised at any time, what all the letters and the numbers mean in this legend on the left, and if you have other properties nearby, what are the adjoining panels that you can look at for the other flood insurance maps. So I think this is a useful document. This firm is the legal document that you would need in order to receive flood insurance and understand it a little better. The mapping site is more useful in terms of navigating from property to property, but you may want to print one of these if you need to for individual properties in the process of getting flood insurance for a single structure. Now, if you're interested in making maps for your community from this website, I actually recommend going to the FRIS site. There's a button up to it in the corner here. It says go to FRIS. And FRIS is the flood risk information system that the state puts together. You can see you can choose North Carolina from this location. There's a little welcome box here, and then you can re-enter the address of the property that you're interested in. And I'll type in that Morehead City address. You can also pick on individual counties and zoom in that way. But if you know a particular property, you can type its address right from that box. A lot of the information on this map is duplicative of what we've just seen. So the flood insurance, the zones, there's some information about the risk to the building. They have an ability on this site to plug in the value of your home or the contents of your home and get some information about the insurance. But what I kind of like more about this site is the ability to turn on and off layers, so that if you want to make some maps, or even if you just want to screen capture what's on this screen to drop into an email to your constituents or whoever else, that this is a slightly more navigable site for creating a more customized map that you might be creating for yourself. So a legend box pops up automatically that shows you the various zones, the floodway zones, and other zones that are protected by levee, for instance. I'm not sure if we have any of those in North Carolina, but there are a variety of different kind of 1% and 0.2% flood insurance or flooding in North Carolina. If I close that, this one icon here sort of looks like stacked squares. That is a layer list. And you can turn on and off the various layers as you wish. So if you want to create a screen capture for an email or a document that you're working on, but you don't want to have the background image, say, you can turn that off with this imagery button, and now you're left with just the building footprints and the flood zones. Maybe you don't want to see the flood zones immediately. You want to give people a sense of what the buildings are without complicating the image. You can do such things as that. If you zoom in a little bit, you can also turn in this building footprints layer here. We've got most of the building footprints included in this one checkbox, which is building footprints with risk. So you can see I can toggle that on and off. But there's a second layer for building footprints that you can turn on, which actually shows you some of the smaller structures like sheds, outbuildings. So for instance, if you look in this area where I'm circling with the mouse, you can see some additional buildings. These are smaller structures that are not in the other layer. So that gives you a sense if there are any other structures that might be impacted by the flooding in your town. So this is just one site. There are a multitude of websites that you can visit that provide maps or downloadable data sets that you can use to help prepare for and respond to severe weather events. This is one that the state provides. I think it's quite useful. I'm going to show you now something that we've been working on in the Historic Preservation Office. And we will provide links to these various websites in communication that we send out. So don't feel the need to kind of try to write down all of this URL up here, which is quite lengthy. One thing that you can do is you can go to our website, HPO, the HPO website, and we have a link to this particular landing page for the maps that we produce from our office. And this is new for us. This is only in the last couple of weeks have we designed a new HPO web. HPO web originated in 2011 when we first started delivering National Register GIS data online, and it has grown from that point. At the beginning, we had maybe 2,000 or 3,000 places shown on the map that were in the National Register. And now we have moved into a gallery of web maps using a different platform for our map delivery. We are using ArcGIS Online as our platform. And when you enter our gallery space, we have 5 of our maps that pop up immediately. And these are HPO Web 2.0. There are various audiences for each of these versions. Feel free to look through any of them that you wish. Each version has a slightly different set of data layers and tools in them, but all of the websites have the same basic data about historic structures and sites in the state. So today we're going to look at the advanced user version. So I just click on that button and our website pops open. Now I know a lot of people like to just skate right through the splash screen, but I would bring your attention to it to give some information about the various tools that are within the website that you can use. There's also some maps that you can click on to find out who our points of contact are in our office for your area. And then just some other information about how the website functions. There's a legend, which is useful as well. You can print that out and have it by your computer side. And note that our website does not work on Microsoft Edge very well, so you'll want to use Chrome or Firefox. If you click on the button that says you understand and agree to everything that I just said, and that we assume no legal liability for any errors in the data, you can click OK. And this is how most of the websites, the versions of our website, will look when you open it, which includes all of our historic property data. Here in the corner, we've got two buttons. The one on the far right with the 4 squares allows you to change the background view. So currently it's showing you a street map, but if you wanted to see an aerial background, you can easily change that, and we'll zoom in and see that a little closer. Or a topographic map. There are a variety of different backgrounds you can choose from. Most folks would probably just use either the streets or the aerial background. The other button in the corner up here is again little stacked squares. These are the data layers, and you can expand these to see exactly what we have available to you. Amber had mentioned earlier that we give a different designation, or we divide all of our surveyed historic resources into various categories. There's the National Register, which are the blue dots on the map. We then also have Study List, which is I like to think of it as the JV team to the National Register. These are properties that are important in our state and may also be on the National Register if they bubble up to that designation at some point. Determined eligible are properties that we find eligible for the National Register through Section 106 process. There's also local landmarks and districts, which will have particular interest to those of you in historic commissions. And then the bulk of the rest of our data are just places that are interesting, but don't necessarily have a historic designation of their own. So those are, you want to keep in mind these two buttons up here. But let's return to that same spot in Morehead City. And you can find an address and zoom to an address using this search box up here. So if I type in 208 South 8th Street, almost spelled it correctly. So here we are at that same location in Morehead City. This is the municipal building at that location. And this is, because it's blue, sits on the National Register. And because it's on the National Register, you can click on either the point or the boundary and get access to the NR nomination with this More Info button here. So if I open that, this will open up the National Register of Historic Places registration form with Morehead City as the name of the property and all the information that comes within this. And this is particularly useful for districts when you're looking up whether a property is contributing or not contributing to the district. Of course, there's only one building here on this property, so it's a there must be two buildings because one is contributing and one is not. And there would be information about all of that within the rest of this document. So understand that when you're in HPO Web, any of the blue resources, the National Register resources, you will be able to find out information about those places on their nomination forms. Now you note that we have surveyed a number of properties in Morehead City. We've got some houses and brick stores and the Carteret County Curb Market. These are all places, these green locations are all places on our study list, and they were put on the study list in 2001, which was a fairly lengthy time. to be on the study list, but any one of these with some more documentation and someone to write up a nomination could find itself on the National Register as well. I've asked us to use the advanced user version this morning because I want to show you a couple of tricks that you can use in the advanced version that you can't use in the general public version. And I'm going to go through these fairly rapidly, but understand that in YouTube you can certainly hit the pause button. And also know that in a few weeks we will be hosting another webinar, some training on how to use our new version of HBO Web. So be on the lookout for information about that by email. So down here, I'm going to click on the Advanced Tools button. Then there's the first option here is Add Data. This tool allows you to add additional data sets to the existing map, and I want to add in some flood data that we just looked at. So I'm going to type in flood just as a keyword, and the first option is FEMA flood zones. So I want to add that to the map. I'm going to minimize this little tool for now, and I'm going to turn off, well actually no, I'll zoom out a little bit. It's a little tougher to see here, but the same shapes that we had for the flood zones on the other maps that we've looked at so far are repeated here. It's the same data set. So we have zone AE with the various base flood elevation divisions, and then what was yellow on the other map is actually kind of a pinkish color or an orangish color on the way that we brought it into HBO Web. And so why might we want to do this? Well, because we are interested in historic properties, we kind of want to see how our data intersects with the flood insurance information. So let's try it. Let's grab, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I think we're interested in finding out, well, how many of these properties are within the flood zone? And let's learn about what the SHPO office has surveyed regarding them. So the tool that we'll use in order to accomplish that task is to click on this red arrow. I'm just going to move this out of the way a little bit. This is a search function that allows us to look up properties by name or the SHPO site number or some other variables. What we really want to do is we want to look at the spatial extent of some of these resources. So we're going to use a spatial filter, and it is the default is to look at everything inside the map. But what we really want to do is we only want to return features or resources that intersect with a shape that we draw on the map. So I'm going to select that. And then beneath that spatial filter, I have some options for setting a point, or drawing a line, or a box, or a shape that's many-sided, a polygon. And I can apply a buffer around it as well. So I could set a point and say I want everything within the 2 miles of that point. What I'm going to do this morning is just to draw a shape and say, tell me everything that's inside that shape. So I'm going to click on the polygon shape tool, and then I'm going to draw, just very roughly, I'm just going to draw a shape around this section of Morehead City, and collect all of the resources that are within this shape. And in doing that, you might be a little more exacting around that edge, but since there's not much out here in the water, we can be a little less. If I can click. There we go. And then double click to end and say apply. And so it's shown 17 red arrows on this map pointing at each of the properties that are within that shape that I just drew. You can see a list of them here. They include, mostly houses, hospital, a former hospital, the Moorhead City Municipal Building that we looked at earlier, and some other places. And if you want a list of that, you can click on this ellipse here in the corner, and then say export to CSV file, which is essentially an Excel file. You can bring this into Excel. Right now it's just open it up automatically in Notepad. But it gives you a list of all of our site ID numbers, the names of the properties, their addresses, and their status, their historic designation status. So this is a quick way of getting a count or a list of all the properties that might be affected by a flood zone or any other area of interest that you're looking at. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I want to display this add data search tool one more time. And this time, instead of looking for floods, I'm going to look at hurricane. Here we have active hurricanes, which I looked at this yesterday, and the only active hurricane that we have around the globe right now is actually off the coast of India. But you could certainly add that layer and see how close the hurricanes are coming to the North Carolina shoreline. But rather than the active one, I'm going to add the recent hurricanes and cyclones. And zoom out a little bit. And so this is just, I forget the extent, this might be just this particular season. You can click on any one of these lines and see this was Hurricane Dorian and all of the other weather events that occurred nearby to North Carolina this year. So this is HBO Web. We'll have much more to talk about HBO Web in a few weeks, but I have one final website that I want to talk to you about. And that's actually accessible through HBO Web in the same way, through that Add Data button. There is, instead of hurricane, this time I want to look at something called social vulnerability. There's a data set which you can add to HBO Web, but I'm going to show you a different way of accessing it right now. Social vulnerability is something that the CDC has put together. And you can click on one of these detail buttons to learn about the index. And I'm going to open up in a new website here. So this is CDC's Social Vulnerability Index. It's from 2016. They make this data available at the census tract level as well as at the county level. And so what is it? What is social vulnerability? Well, those of us in historic preservation talk a lot about historic structures and the built environment. And today, I've also discussed a little bit about where the built environment intersects with geographic areas of high natural hazard risk. However, I'd like you to also consider what social scientist researchers call social vulnerability. And social vulnerability is based on census data, and I'm going to show you their documentation here. This is actually going to be on the quiz, so this is the part where you might want to pay most attention. So the Social Vulnerability Index takes a whole bunch of census data variables, and they've broken them into 4 categories: social economic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, and housing and transportation. And they've taken variables that fall into these categories, such as poverty level, or are there presence of children in the house? Is there a presence of someone with a disability in the house? Do they speak English less than well? So probably a lot of native Spanish speakers would be in North Carolina. Is this a household that doesn't have a vehicle? Is it a mobile home? And they take all of these variables and they crunch them together into a single overall vulnerability index. And so you can think about how different people respond differently to severe weather events, and not everyone can evacuate or does evacuate in the same way. So if you, for instance, are a native Spanish speaker, you may not hear the messages on the radio about evacuating. Or if you have someone in your home who needs specific medical care or has a disability, it may be difficult for you to evacuate. Obviously, if you are living in poverty, it's a lot harder for you to leave your home and stay at a hotel while the hurricane is playing out. So it's a index which I think is useful for understanding how you can measure disparate neighborhoods in a way to understand how folks might react to or prepare for a severe weather event. So if we go back to the site that has this information, it allows you to open up in a map a color coding of the index. And once again, we're going to zoom down. Instead of that particular address, we can just zoom to Morehead City. And turn on the layer. And I'll zoom out a little bit just to give you some context. I'm also going to, this ellipse here allows you to adjust the transparency. So let's adjust that just a little bit so you can see some of the town names underneath. And so we have some, I'm sorry, one last thing. The legend will be located right here. So it's an index that goes from 0 to 1. With 0 being the lowest vulnerability. These are the yellow areas, and the very dark blue areas being the areas of highest vulnerability. So you notice that the areas along Pine Knoll Shores are yellow, whereas this corner of Morehead City and Beaufort is higher in blue. You can click on any one of these locations, and they will give you the overall SVI score, and then by group of variables, what is the concern. So it looks like in this particular census tract that I've clicked on, the minority and language theme is actually the area that's of least vulnerability. So there may not be as many Spanish speakers here. Let's click on a different one. That as well. I feel like there was one in here that I looked at earlier where there was a higher percentage of Spanish speakers. But anyway, this gives you a sense of each of the themes, like what is driving the vulnerability for each of these census tracts. And folks that live here are probably a little wealthier, English speakers, have resources that they can rely upon when evacuating from a hurricane, whereas folks here are perhaps living in mobile homes, or maybe there are higher numbers of folks with disabilities living in these areas. And these are, I suspect that if you look at this map in your own neighborhood, in your own town, you will identify that this probably makes sense to you. But what I think this provides is a quantifiable metric which you can use to make some decisions ahead of time and after an event. So, how would a CLG or a local historic commission use this metric? Well, if you're planning for a severe weather event, you might need to change how you do that if you knew that the majority of the residents in a particular historic district spoke Spanish. Or after an event, if the response includes elevation of structures, like Debbie had talked about a little earlier, it might be useful to know ahead of time if there are a number of residents that have disabilities or other ADA compliance issues. So this is just one more way of thinking about how to respond or prepare to a disaster event and other severe weather training. And Let me throw up my contact information. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. And don't forget that we will be having some additional HPO web training in just a few weeks. So I hope this wet your whistle a little bit in terms of what you can do with our new site, and we'll have a lot more information about it coming up. So I thank you for watching, and I hope you learned a little bit today.